I'm Emily Hort Tompkins, Maynard Ingram Mayor. I'm not actually buried here, but this area is where I spent the most idyllic time of my life, and it is the hub of that delicious scandal that so enthralled newspaper readers in San Francisco, Humboldt, and all of California. And it was because of my notoriety that the good spirits that do dwell here invited me back to act as hostess. And one of them asked if I still believe in the quote in the San Francisco newspaper of 1891. And my answer is yes, I do. Let me read that to you. We are living in the 19th century, not in monastic and medieval days. Why should any man own a woman? Why, have I not as much right to break bonds that are hateful to me as the chains about a slave? When men were apes, they fought one another for possession of a woman. And marriage is one of the remnants of their apehood. Well, let me tell you a little about my life. I was born in 1862 and grew up in Marin County. My father, Minthorpe Tompkins, was a rancher, prosperous cattle rancher, and a banker. People said I had everything: education, luxury, a place in San Francisco's social elite, but sometimes everything is not enough. You see, reading novels led me to see how much I was missing in life: beauty and love. Oh, I got a husband, all right. Daddy married me to his rich friend and fellow cattle rancher, Joseph Maynard. He was also a bird collector and taxidermist and treated me as one of his trophies. Oh, I gave him 2 children and 10 years of my life, but not my love. Being thoroughly miserable, I tended to overeat. But then I became determined to turn my life around. I began taking long walks and horseback rides around the ranch, sometimes accompanied by a young ranch hand, William Ingram. He was right out of one of those novels, tall, well-built, and wickedly handsome. On one walk, I accidentally dropped a handkerchief. We both bent down to pick it up, bumped heads, gazed into each other's eyes, and that kiss was better than in any novel. Well, we then knew that things had to change. On a day in August of 1891, I told my husband that I was going to San Francisco to shop, see my dentist, and that I'd spend the night with a girlfriend in her home in Oakland. Instead, William and I spent the night at the International Hotel in San Francisco, and then caught a steamer to remote Humboldt County. A train took us from Eureka to Fortuna, where William, so strong and capable, got a job at the Newburgh Mill. We lived in a tiny little cabin, so different from my last home, but filled with love. My owner, Maynard, reported my disappearance and offered a reward for my return. Soon, sensational accounts in all the newspapers turned to scandal-mongering when it was discovered that I'd actually run off with a hired hand. Soon, police and reporters and even a minister tracked us down and tried to convince me to change my sinful and illegal ways and return to my husband. But how could I? I loved William. I loved the trees, our cozy little cabin. For the first time in my life, I was happy. Well, Maynard secured a divorce, and I was free. To damp scandal, William and I got married, but our life was no longer carefree. Fearing brutal scandal mongers, I stayed up many nights, keeping guard while exhausted William slept. I'm convinced that my vigilance deterred vandals, but I believe it was they who set fire to the lumber stacks at Newburgh Mill. Well, things move on. So did we. We moved to Chico, where daughter Eleanor was born. Notice I named her after a strong English queen. Other moves followed, and our love gradually faded. Finally, we agreed to a divorce. But sadly, life for an unmarried woman was still not easy, so I married again, this time to a pleasant enough San Francisco plumber, Joe Mayer. I outlived him. And the one thing that carried me through my 91 years was cherishing the memory of our beautiful love nest here under your gorgeous trees. Well, it's time for you to move on too, and you'll get a chance to meet some of the spirits that had the good fortune of actually living more of their lives here. They gave me a list, and it's amazing the typewriters they have nowadays. Look how clear that is. I'll read you who you get to see. First, there will be Emma Lovelace, who is still trying to solve the mystery of her husband's disappearance. Poor dear. And then you'll get to Dan McGowan, who surprisingly has agreed to talk to you, though generally he doesn't like to see anybody. Muriel Mully, who'll tell you the thrilling tale of the great Fortuna bank robbery. Then you'll have Mary Langdon, who ended her life in a most novel and determined manner. Then we have Roy Enders, whose life was cut short at a deserted ranch the day after Christmas. Odd. And then Jake Simmons, who met his end during the worst rainstorm in 20 years. And finally, there's Desi Nichols, who did her bit in World War II as a Rosie the Riveter, something I would love to have done myself had I been a little younger at the time. Well, run along now, enjoy your visit, and enjoy this beautiful area. Bye-bye.
Have you seen him? His name is Orrin Dayton Lovelace. He went missing in May 1884 near Yakima, Washington Territory. I'm sorry. I forget. I'm not looking for him anymore. He is my husband. My name is Emma Yates Lovelace. I was born near Birmingham in England and came over to this country with my parents, my brother Elijah and my sister Anne, in 1854 when I was 15. We settled in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Elijah and Anne both married and started families of their own, but year after year went by and I still wasn't married. I know God has His plans for each of us. For some women, that plan is for them to be wives and mothers. Other women have a different calling, to help those wives and mothers and try to ease the burdens they bear. I helped my sister and my sister-in-law when they gave birth. I helped care for their children. That was my life, until I met Orrin. I was already 30 years old. I thought I knew what my life was going to be, and then suddenly there he was. He was the handsomest man I had ever seen, and somehow he wanted to marry me. He was so kind and gentle and so pleasant to be around, and had such a beautiful singing voice. And when we married, I thought I was the happiest woman in the world. My brother Elijah and his family went out west to California, and Orrin and I soon followed. We settled in Eureka. Orrin was a skilled carpenter and a sawyer, and his skills were in great demand at all the sawmills in this area. In 1876, we bought land in Fortuna, or Springville as it was at the time, and Orrin built our house over on the north end of Main Street, near the Friedenbaugh place. With the exception of 2 years, I lived there ever since. It hadn't taken me long to realize that something was different about our marriage. We didn't have the kind of marriage my brother and my sister had. We never had children. I don't know if that was because of me, because I wasn't capable of it, or if it was because Orrin was so seldom with me. He traveled a great deal for his work at the different sawmills, and he would often stay out all night at the saloons with his friends. He didn't drink to excess, but he said he enjoyed the company of his friends and he needed it after his long days at work. Sometimes he would spend the night with one friend or another when they left the saloon late. He said it was because he didn't want to come home late and wake me, although I told him over and over that I wouldn't mind it if he did. My brother Elijah and his family, they moved to Yakima, Washington Territory, near Fort Simcoe, at the Yakima Indian Agency. Now Elijah heard of a job for a carpenter at the fort there, and he wrote to us saying how much the job paid, saying how perfect it would be for Orrin. I wish I had gone with him. We were still happy together in those times when he was home. Some women never even had that, but we were so used to living apart for long stretches by that time that he went to Fort Simcoe and I remained behind. The news came to me in a telegram from Elijah. Orrin had left the fort for a 2-week job at a nearby sawmill, but at the end of that 2 weeks he didn't come back. The post commander made inquiries and found that Orrin had never even reached the mill. Somewhere along the road to that sawmill, Orrin Dayton Lovelace had vanished. I took a steamship from Eureka to Portland and a stagecoach from there to Yakima. I lived with my brother and his family for 2 years while I was searching for Orrin. I showed his photograph to everyone. I showed it at every saloon, every hotel, every house along that road. After 2 years of utter failure, I came back home. I lived another 42 years, never knowing what had happened to him. Was he killed along that road? Was it a fight in a saloon? Had he been gambling and he was killed for his winnings? I can't believe he would have just left, not without telling me. I won't believe that. I've thought that I caught a glimpse of him from time to time afterwards, but only faintly, as though through a mist in the distance. I still haven't found him. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. If only he would tell me. I won't blame him, no matter what the truth is. I only want to know.
Sure is a crowd of you. I don't like crowds, I never have. I guess that comes from being the oldest of 6 kids. Never a moment's peace in that house. Ballantoy Village it was, County Antrim. I used to skip out from my chores any time I could to get out of the house. Run up to the churchyard and the hill overlooking the harbour and sit among the gravestones and be alone. That's what I was trying to do that hot July afternoon. 8th of July, 1915 it was. That bunkhouse at the Newburgh logging camp wasn't any better than the cottage I grew up in. Only instead of 6 kids, 5 other kids all around me hollering and raising Cain, there were 40 guys snoring all around me of a night. The men I worked with, they got used to me ways. They knew their times would come when I'd light out and get out into the wilds and be on my own. Oh, that's just Dan's way, they'd say. So nobody thought it was strange when I was gone for 3 weeks. Nobody thought that there was anything wrong until poor Lem Woods was out there fixing his fence and he found, but where are my manners? My mother would ask me now, was I brought up in a barn? And my sister Sal would ask me that too. She was a lot like our mother, good in a lot of ways, but in a lot of other ways she drove me stark, staring crazy. But my mother and Sal would say for me to introduce myself. Name's Dan McGowan, born in Ballantoy, 1863, and died, but I'll be telling you about that. Well, I got out of the house as soon as I could. My cousin, Alex Christie, and I set out for America in 1884 when we were 21. Well, being the eldest of the family, I guess I should have stayed and helped run the farm, but I didn't ask the family's leave. I just took the money I'd saved and scraped up from working on a fishing boat, and Alex and I up and went. Yep, and my little sister Sal, she was the youngest baby and the baby of the family, and she wasn't yet 4 years old. And I think she grew up listening to my mother complaining about the fact that I'd run out on my family and my responsibilities. And she grew up to be the biggest nagging thing that I ever heard right here in Humboldt County. Well, my cousin and I drifted out to Humboldt County here in California. And wouldn't you know it, he went straight back into farming. After we'd sworn when we left home we'd never touch hand to plow again. But I stuck to my guns, no farming for me. I became a woodsman, and a chopper too, a good one. I must have worked almost all the wood camps here in Humboldt County at one time or another. All the foremen got to know me, knew I was good at my job, so they didn't care if I walked out of the camp for weeks at a time. Now, I worked spring, summers, and falls here in the woods, and then in the wintertime I'd go down to San Francisco and work odd jobs down there until the rainy season was over and the wood jobs opened up again. Funny thing about the crowds down there, they didn't bother me. The city crowds are different. They're sort of like the trees up here in Humboldt. They didn't know me, and I didn't know them, and that was the way I liked it. My cousin, Alex, he decided to have a visit with the family back in the old country in 1901. And he asked me if I'd like to go with him, and I said, no, thank you. I left the old country to be away from my family. But I couldn't be away forever, because when he came back, he came with a blushing bride, a bride who happened to be my little sister Sal. Well, after that, it was harder and harder to get away. Alex and Sal would always be asking me to come stay with them, have dinner with them, be godfather to their kids. And I tried for a while, I really did. I tried to be the person they wanted me to be, but that wasn't me. And I knew it, even though they couldn't understand. And so when I finally did go back, I'd get that lecture from Alex about how I was hurting my sister and my nieces and nephews and all. Well, when I went out into the woods that Saturday afternoon, I didn't really have any thought of ending it all. But as I sat there under that tree, enjoying the quiet, I said to myself, the quiet doesn't have to end here. I can be here forever. I can always enjoy the solitude and be alone. So I took out my handkerchief and my tie and made a good strong knot, made a noose, and I hung myself from that same tree. Well, I hung around there for about 3 weeks, if you'll pardon the pun, and enjoying drinking in the solitude. And then poor Lem Woods came by about that 3 weeks later. And I told you that at July afternoon it was hot. And I guess I was pretty ripe by that time, because the birds had pecked me eyes out. And when poor Lem found me, he began using words me sister and me mother would have fainted dead over if they've ever heard me use them. Well, during the funeral a couple of days later, I was still drifting around. And me cousin and me sister, Sal, they didn't go. Didn't bring the kids. I guess my sister thought she couldn't forgive me for being such a sinner as to take my own life. But you know, funny thing, there were 200 woodsmen and millmen there. Men I'd worked with over the years. So I guess, even though I had always wanted to try to be alone, there were still people who cared about me after all. And that's all well and good, but don't you people have some other place to be? You better be moving along. I told you I don't like crowds.
It really was just another workday. I was taking the deposit from my job at Hanson Hunter Furniture Company to the Bank of Fortuna. I always loved that little stroll. It was like a nice break to clear my head in between exchanging smiles with the passerbys. As I got down to the bank, I made my way up to the steps, and through the window, I saw a man with a gun. I gasped, my eyes wide. I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is Muriel Zane Mackenzie Mooley Farmer. I was born June 10th, 1893 in Eureka, California. My parents, Clement Jones Mooley and Hannah Frances Purdy Miller, were from Canada and immigrated to California soon after they married in 1888. I am one of 7 children, all born here in Humboldt County. 2 of my siblings, Albert and Lily, they passed when they were young children. That was hard, but life goes on, as they say. One of my sisters, Adelaide, she was a printer for the Humboldt Beacon, and the others worked jobs here and there. As for myself, I was a bookkeeper of Hanson Hunter Furniture Company, which puts me back on those steps at the Fortuna Bank, deposit in hand, looking through the glass at a man with a gun. There were 2 of them. They had dark skin and there was something white powder on their faces, and they wore bandanas. There were 4 people up against the wall, fear written all over their faces. My head was spinning and my feet were frozen in the spot. My eyes kept darting from the gun to the people against the wall and then back to the gun. And then it struck me, a thought. Any second now, those men would feel my eyes on them and that gun would be pointed at me. I had to move. With all my might, I wheeled my legs to run. I turned dead set on getting back to my job. I had to tell someone what was happening. I burst through the doors of the furniture company, eyes wide, arms flailing, and I yell, "The bank is being robbed!" Everybody turns and stares at me. My boss, Bobby Wise, comes running out of his office, and he grabs the shotgun from under the counter and heads out onto Main Street. The alarms are sounding. He jumps into his Studebaker. His friend, Bert Robinson, who's a real crack shot with his high-powered rifle, he jumps into the seat beside him, and they head out of town blazing east after the robbers, guns in hand. You know, they reach speeds of over 35 miles per hour. You know, that may not seem like much to you now, but in my time, they might as well have been flying. By this time, word of the robbery had spread all over the county. George Clooney, the commander of the American Legion in Eureka, California, he heard of the robbery, and he knew they were headed towards Hydesville. Unable to get his hands on a rifle, he decided to string a barricade of barbed wire across the highway. Once he got the materials gathered, the robbers flew past him, going 60 miles per hour. Frustrated, he got in his car and he joined the chase. As news reached Carlotta, armed men gathered over the bridge over Jaeger Creek, waiting for the fleeing robbers. The 2 bad guys, knowing their gig was almost up, they pushed their stolen car even harder, which was to their detriment. As they reached the bottom of the grade west of Carlotta, the car's wheel bearings burned out. All their momentum came to a halt. They had no choice but to separate and flee on foot. Using 2 flour bags, they divided up the loot. One took the coins, totaling $6,000. The other took the bills, totaling $16,000. And they ran into the woods. The one with the coins, he was caught soon after. His loot found nearby. His name was Mahach. His partner in crime, Rubes, he was found several days later, but without the money. No one really knows what happened to Rubes' share of the robbery, but it sure did spur quite a few treasure hunts. Hey, who knows? Maybe someday one of you will stumble across it. Well, after that, life in Fortuna went back to normal. I ended up getting married. I wed Lee Farmer at my parents' house on June 26, 1927. Oh, I wore a gown of blue and rose chiffon, and I carried a bouquet of roses and fern. I was 34 years old, and my groom was 29. That's right, I married a younger man. After that, we moved to Kansas, and it was there that I gave birth to my son, and it was there that I died. I got sick. My husband brought my body back here to Fortuna so I could be buried with my family. You know, my son was only 3 when I passed. It's a shame, really. I would have loved to seen him grow up and have kids of his own and to hold my grandbabies. I would have loved to tell him how his mom sounded the alarm for Fortuna's big bank robbery. I think he really would have liked that story. Well, you know, if nothing else, I got to share that with you today. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for visiting me.
Hello, I'm Mary Langdon. Of course, most Fortuna folks know me better as Mrs. Chauncey Langdon. He was Fortuna's most respected justice of the peace. Too bad there wasn't more peace at home. But that was neither of our faults. I was my mother's merry little lamb. That's what she always called me. I did what I was told, and I did everything that I could to help around the house back in Attica, New York. But then I took it into my head to get married, and she could have called me Mary, Mary, quite contrary instead. See, she didn't approve of my choice of a husband, but I went right ahead and I chose him anyway. And then things only got worse. You see, my first husband had a longing for adventure. So, as soon as we got wind of all that gold in California, off we set around the Horn on a sailing ship to get some of that gold for ourselves. What he found was whiskey. He spent all of his time and all of our money in the saloons, and finally I had no choice but to divorce him. That was the end of it as far as my family back home was concerned. I never did get another letter from them after they found out that I was a divorcee. So there I was, a lone woman on the frontier, with a 1-year-old son, my Charlie, to support. Well, good thing I found another husband fast. Chauncey Langdon, an important gold seeker from a rich family back in Vermont. His parents didn't approve of him going gold digging either, and they sure didn't approve of him marrying a divorcee. But that didn't matter to us, we said. We had our own family. We could do things ourselves. Chauncey was a good stepfather to my Charlie. And then Caroline came along about 6 years later. They both were my biggest joys. I could go on adventures to Africa with those two and never have as much fun as I had right here at home with the both of them. My Charlie boy grew up to be a fine, strong one, helping Chauncey and the other ranch hands take care of our land. And we made sure, when he chose his path, the thirst for new frontiers over setting down roots, we wouldn't hold him back. He knew that. A mother's love does run deep, though, wherever he may have gotten to by now. Oh, but my Caroline, whatever will a mother do with one like my Caroline? Her wild frontiers were more that of the heart, and she grew up to be more contrary than I ever was. First, she married that scoundrel George, and then to 2 different Williams. Good heavens, can you believe that? I hope it wasn't my own divorce that led her down that path. Eventually, we all settled on the second William, but not without a few bumps in the road first. I suppose you could say those bumps were named Bertha, Lottie, and Edna. I'm sure they all grew up to be fine citizens themselves, but I wouldn't know. It was around this time my darling grandbabies came along that I started going gray, simply from their mother's roustabout habits. And not just gray hair either, but fading in spirits. Poor Bertha got the lion's share of it, even having to come under our care for a time. But I'll tell you, as much adventure as raising your own children can be, raising grandchildren is no picnic in the park. But I knew from experience, when they need you to be the face of stability, you just got to stand strong. No splitting hairs about it. No sir, no ma'am. Family does their own work. I wasn't going to have some stranger raise my littles while those two fought it out in court. Maybe Chauncey and I were both disappointments to our families back home, but we weren't going to let down our family when they needed us. And these days they come here and they tell me everyone's doing fine and they've all moved on well. But of course I can't tell them back how proud I am of them. There are times I do ache to reach out and apologize, though. Never would I want my Bertha to know she was a burden. Oh, I've been getting worse and worse. But she wasn't the cause of this, whatever's got me down in recent years. Or how I got here, either. Even still, I've known from day one, you don't just leave your family with a burden like that. You just don't. You just don't. Outside of my bedroom window. How's that? I got to thinking of another 4th of July a long time ago. Back in 1876, our nation's 100th birthday. That was the day our Caroline married her husband number 1, George. Right in the middle of all the festivities. Thanks, Caroline. Of course, you know how that marriage turned out. But thinking back to how happy we are, we're so joyful and so hopeful in that time. I couldn't stand the contrast between that 4th of July and this one. So I decided to just end it. For months, I hadn't even been able to turn over in bed on my own. Chauncey had rigged up a rope with a loop in it so I could get a little leverage and turn myself over. And, well, on that July 5th, 1904, I made a noose out of the rope he'd rigged up for me. I put that noose around my neck and I threw myself out of the bed. I was just a few inches from the floor while I strangled. I'm sorry Chauncey had to find me like that when he came home from work that day. Sorry for so much. After always saying and believing I wouldn't leave my family to bear burdens that should have been mine, I failed them after all. I failed my family here just like I failed my family back in New York. Just like I always said that I would never do. I hope Chauncey knows how sorry I am. I hope they all do.
Howdy folks, everyone comfortable? Well, my name is Leroy Enders. Roy to my friends and family, not that I had much of the former. It seems that I've been woken from my eternal slumber to tell my tale. You'll have to excuse the cards. Little did they know when they woke me up that the disease I had in life would have affected my memory so much. The lovely people here were able to fill in the gaps and they gave me these little cards to help keep me on track. Oh, the grave is a strange place for those of us taken too young. 33 I was, and cursed from the start, if I were to say true, knew nothing but hard days all my life. Born in 1888 to my lovely mother Mary. On the day of my birth, my mother was just a few years older than I was when I met my end. Not another more precious or kind soul has graced this earth as my mother. My father was kind too, and caring, and the hardest working son of a bitch I ever did know. Never knew if he was proud of me. I had too much competition for his affection. Born the last of 6 I was. William was the oldest and father's favorite. Charles was second and my favorite. Then there was Bert and Ray, the troublemakers. Birth was hard back then, and Mother had a couple of stillbirths, and including her only daughter, Del May, born in July 4th, 1884. But she was too good for this earth too, and was taken back the same day. Then I was spit out into this earth right about this time, about 128 years ago. Well, we all lived together in various places down in Santa Rosa, where I attended school until I was old enough to help with the labor jobs with the other men. By 1910, we'd worked hard enough to come across some luck, and the folks bought a hotel. Bert and I became waiters, and Mother managed the business. Times were tough, and within the year, we had to sell the business and move on. Bert stayed on as a waiter there, and Charles became a barber and moved out on his own. Father and I moved to Oakland, where I became a store clerk for a local dry goods mercantile, and he took on the night watchman's job. Well, Mother eventually took sick, and so I returned back to Santa Rosa and took back my old waiter's job to be close to her. She passed in 1915. I immediately enlisted in the Army and was assigned to the Coast Artillery Corps, charged with protecting the harbors and coasts from aircraft and invasion. The good bit was I was stationed in Honolulu, prettiest place I ever seen. Wish my mother had been able to see it too. The bad bit was somewhere along the line I caught some meningitis. At the time, the disease was generally fatal, and although I did survive, I was left with a poor memory, a bad temper, and the occasional fit or seizure. Once the Army found out, I was given an honorable discharge and sent back home. Upon returning to civilian life, I found it hard to keep a job. I worked and lived with my father down in San Francisco after my discharge, but given Pop's age and my new ailments, I was more of a burden than a help. I finally got a good job as a trucker with Southern Pacific Railroad, making the best money at 27.5 cents an hour. Within the year of taking that job, though, my father passed on too. All my brothers had moved on and with their families and moved north. By 1921, I decided to move north too to see if my brothers could help me find work. I was having a hard time keeping employed due to my fits and mood swings. My first stop was at a doctor's in Watsonville. He gave me a note describing my ailments and to contact my brother Charles if I ever didn't wake up from one of my fits. It was by this note found in my pocket that the sheriff was able to identify my body. Well, I walked and I took the train north, and I was headed all the way to Fort Bragg, where Charles and his family lived. On the train, I met a man who said if I ever made it back to Willits, he'd have a job for me. So I spent Thanksgiving with Charles and his family, but with all the kids, there was no room for me there and no work either. Well, but they pointed me to Eureka, where work was plentiful, and upon arriving, I did find a job quickly, but I lost it just as quickly due to a fit. Well, I woke up in the hospital on Christmas Day. They discharged me that afternoon, and all I had left in my pockets was a copper penny, a 1-cent stamp, my doctor's note, and my father's gun. Having no other prospects, I decided to head to Willits, so I began to walk. An auto stage picked me up that afternoon free of charge and dropped me in Garberville. Having no money, I kept walking towards Willits. So I walked off into the dark, cold night, hungry and pretty angry. Now, I'd heard of an old-timer making camp out at a deserted ranch just out of town, and I figured he might have a place for me to sleep and perhaps a food or coffee at the least. I came upon the ranch really, really late that night, cold, tired, hungry, and angry, and totally out of options. I knocked on the door, and the old-timer was slow in answering. When I told the codger my plight and begged him for help, he offered me little and told me to be on my way. Too tired and hungry to think clearly, I was desperate, so I pulled out my gun and demanded food. I punctuated my need with a shot through the wall. It made my point, but it also made him nervous enough to arm himself while I wasn't looking. The meal was good, right enough, and it made me all the more tired. I decided I declared my intent to sleep in the old barn, but this seemed to be too much for the old man, and we argued over the arrangement. I decided to scare him into submission and threw a couple more rounds his way, but man, that old-timer was fast, and before I knew what was happening, he pulled out his rifle and plugged me straight through the heart. I laid out there on the cold ground all night, before the next day when my killer went to town to tell his tale. Well, the sheriff came out to verify the old man's story, and that's when they found the note in my pocket and were able to identify me. Sleppy was the old man's name. I found out from this side of the grave. He didn't deserve the treatment I gave him. That I can see now that I'm free of my disease. My body was stored here for a while until my brother came and gave me a proper burial in Fort Bragg. Guess I kind of stayed around here, though, which is better than that old ranch where I got plugged. Well, I'm glad I was invited here to tell my tale. I'm glad I could get that off my soul. I think I can rest easier now. Thank you.
Hello there. Thanks for taking time out of your day to come visit us. I'm here by accident, you might say, but more of that later. I'm Jake Simmons. Well, my given name actually is Robert E. Lee Simmons. I was born in Arkansas in 1864, but coming out here, it just seemed that Jake was better. In fact, Jake stuck so well that one of the newspapers commenting on my demise even decided to identify me as Jacob Simmons. Well, I kept the tavern just one block this way and on the other side of the street from the Star Hotel, and later we ran the grocery store there. Some of you may wonder, why change from a tavern to a grocery store? Isn't a tavern more lucrative? And I would say yes, it was, but it was not of my choice, although, to be honest, I had something to do with it, I guess. Some of you have probably heard the story of the frightful tragedy that beset this community on New Year's Day 1912. For those who haven't, I'll give you a brief rundown. It seems there was this woodsman. His name was Hodgkins, Stephen Hodgkins, and he had really tied one on. He was out in the street. He was causing all sorts of ruckus. And the watchman, that was Mr. Renfro, he was my brother Ty's father-in-law for a while. Mr. Renfro told Hodgkins to get from the street and go into the tavern. And he came into my tavern. Well, you know, a roaring drunk's no fun to deal with, even when you've had a lot of experience, but I should have tried to keep him in the tavern, because when he went out, he drew his knife and just stabbed Renfro in the back. Oh, it was not mortal. But Renfro, he was a peaceable man. He drew his revolver and fired 2 shots into the air to frighten Hodgkins away, but Hodgkins wouldn't be frightened. He came after Renfro with that knife and, well, Renfro shot him. Even then, he aimed low, but Hodgkins died within 3 hours, and the town was horrified. Now, you have to remember, this was when the temperance movement was just at its height, and women had gotten the right to vote in California the year before, in 1911. So one of the first opportunities women had to vote in Fortuna was a referendum on whether the town should go dry. And the dries won. Now, I can't believe, if men had been doing the voting only, that the dries would won, but when they did, and we had 3 months to decide what we were going to do. Well, Ty, he and I decided a town's got to eat. Let's run a grocery store. And so we just switched from a tavern to a grocery store. And that's what I continued to do right up to the end of my life on the 26th of November, 1926. Now, it had been raining cats and dogs. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Well, I was trying to hurry home, and I stopped at the edge of the street, took a brief look, and stepped out. Well, it seems Miss Alice Russell from Alton, she was driving, trying to get home herself. And she stopped and started her car into the intersection, and we met, and that's all there was to it. Dr. Jennings, he was on the street at the time, and he was over in a matter of seconds, but there was nothing that could be done. Well, when it's time to go, you have to go, and I had had a full life, a wonderful family, and served my community well. I had no real regrets, but I sure was sorry for that young woman. Poor Miss Russell, she took it awful hard, and it wasn't her fault. It was just an accident.
My life took me down roads I never would have imagined. Here I was, a Rosie the Riveter with 4 children and a husband as a CB, one of the first construction battalions in the Navy. I longed for the days that we took the dusty roads to California. You see, Fred and I were what you Californians called Okies. We would have never left Oklahoma in 1935 if it wasn't for the Dust Bowl. Why, there was no more grass on my field than on my kitchen floor. We lived with the dust, we ate with it, we slept with it, watched it strip us of all our possessions and any hope of possessions. There's a book about it that you might have read called The Grapes of Wrath. Well, we were like the Judds, although we didn't have a car. We took our wagon through Texas and Arizona and finally to Rio Dell, where Fred got a job as a bark peeler for Pacific Lumber. And if our trip wasn't challenging enough, when we arrived, the horse was pregnant, the dog was pregnant, and I was pregnant. Then World War II hit, and the rest is history. When Fred came home, he was different. At first, I tried to ignore his edginess, but over time, I just couldn't. A lot of marriages didn't survive during that time, and ours was no exception. By 1949, I was married to George Tallman, an in-law of sorts. His youngest son, Norman, was married to my oldest daughter, Mildred. Although their marriage didn't last as long as George's and I. We lasted 30 years until George passed away in 1977. Well, he's buried right here with me. And then about 8 years later, despite my family's wishes, I wanted one more journey to follow. I wanted to move to Yuba City. The weather was so much like my Oklahoma days, and I didn't know anyone there, but I was tired of the reminders of my 2 younger girls that had just passed away, and I just wanted one more adventure. I never thought I would marry again, but I never thought I would meet Herman Bledsoe. We met at church and we'd take long drives, and his wife had just died and we both deserved some companionship. But unfortunately, a couple of years later on Valentine's Day, he passed away. So as I lay there in between that dream and wake state, I thought about my life, and I have no regrets. I lived my life by my standards, not by societal standards or by what my husbands wanted me to do, but by the road less traveled, and sometimes in a fog of sorts.